So, welcome to day 6 of our Diabetic Success Holiday Challenge. I'm really glad to see each one of you here. And today we're going to talk a little bit about things that help us to lower insulin resistance, and specifically weight and meal balancing. We'll kind of do part 2 of this on Sunday, where we look at how movement helps us to lower insulin resistance. So, um, insulin resistance is one of the mechanisms that force our body to produce extra insulin and makes the insulin we do produce less effective. As we talked about, I think on our second day, that insulin resistance is that inability of the body to allow insulin to open the door and let glucose into the cell as it should. And so the things we do that lower that resistance to insulin can really decrease our need for the pancreas to produce insulin if we're type 2 diabetics, but it can even reduce the need for injectable insulin if we're type 1 diabetics or insulin dependent. So this is really important for any kind of diabetic and for pre-diabetics, because with pre-diabetics, one of their biggest issues is insulin resistance. They haven't yet gotten to the point where their pancreas is not able to produce enough insulin to control blood sugars, but they are on the way there. And so everyone needs to have low insulin resistance for good health. So we're going to talk about two factors that are kind of related. So I put them together today, which are both looking at weight and looking at meal balancing. So when we look at weight, if you remember in your baseline assessment, you had several biometrics related to weight there. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we look at those numbers and what they really mean, because not all pounds are equal. For example, some of factors you want to evaluate when you're looking at your weight is my weight normal or not? And there's several ways to look at normal weights. One of them is simply by looking at your height and your weight, and that's the one that gives you your BMI. When we look at weight, we need to also keep in mind that weight is really a byproduct of a healthy lifestyle. That is, a healthy weight is a byproduct of a healthy lifestyle. But a healthy weight does not automatically mean you're healthy. So it's really important that when we're looking at weight, we're looking at how did we get to our weight and how do we get to the healthiest weight by healthy lifestyles. In other words, there are some people that are skinny, some people that are even underweight. They would not be necessarily healthy just looking at the numbers on the scale. And what we're really looking for is health, not a number on the scale. Now, if someone is overweight, as in over fat, that does increase our health risk in a lot of different areas. It increases our health risk for developing heart disease, for developing diabetes, for developing high blood pressure, lots of those things. So normalizing weight, we also need to remember, is a process. We didn't get to an abnormal weight overnight, and we're not going to get to a normal weight overnight either. But as soon as we start the process of normalizing our weight, we start to experience health benefits. And many of those health benefits kick in before we get to an ideal weight or ideal fat percentage in our body. So I want that to be an encouragement to anybody that might be struggling with weight, to realize that you are going to start reaping benefits of getting closer to your ideal weight, whether that means gaining weight or losing weight. You will be getting benefits as you move in that direction. And we also want to look at how much of your weight is from muscle and how much of that weight is from fat, because that is a really important consideration. Body fat percentage is an important number for us to look at because it's our excess body fat that really increases our health risk. Here are some numbers that we can look at and compare kind of where we're at. It does vary slightly by age. So I put in two age brackets that cover a lot of the people that are in our groups, but you'll notice that the differences aren't huge. So if you're like younger than these age brackets, it's still going to be close to these numbers. So if you're in the age bracket of 41 to 60, A healthy body fat percentage is 23 to 35%. If you are under 23%, you're actually underweight, under fat. And that can affect hormone production. It can affect our mood. It can affect other things. So we want to be in the healthy range. Overweight would be 35 to 40%. And anything over 40% would be obese. So this kind of helps to give us a little guide as to where we might be in terms of body fat. Okay, so if we're in the age bracket of 61 to 79, a healthy body fat percentage is 24 to 36%, and overweight would be 36 to 42%. Obese would be anything over that. Underweight, obviously anything under 24. So you'll notice the percentage points only change a few numbers, but they do give you just a little bit of extra leeway as we age. Now, how do we measure body fat? The most accurate way to measure body fat is like you go into a lab and they put you in a big tank of water and they like actually measure the exact amount of fat in your body. Most of us don't have access to that, but many modern bathroom scales now have what they call a fat impedance function, which means if you stand on it barefoot on the little contacts, they measure how a very small amount of electricity goes through your body, and they can, from that, infer a pretty close body fat percentage. So that's probably the easiest way to assess this. You also can go in like to a doctor's office or something, and then some doctors will be able to do like calipers where they pinch, some of the fat on the back of your arm or around your waist, and then they can kind of look at what your body fat percentage is based on those measurements. So for our purposes, probably what the bathroom scale can do for you if you have a fat measurement option on that was going to be adequate. And you can get scales that will do that for like under $30. So that is something that can be a good way to measure your progress in increasing muscle mass and decreasing body fat as percentages of your body composition. So those are some things that can be helpful. Okay, so another aspect of looking at fat and weight are our waist and hip sizes. That was also part of your baseline assessment. Your waist circumference all by itself helps to determine abdominal fat risk. So you want to look at that number all by itself. But you also want to look at waist-hip ratio. That's a different kind of number. It measures something a little bit differently. And if either one of these are not optimal, then that is something you want to look at. So sometimes you can have one that's okay and one that's not, or one that's worse than the other, like you have higher points on your baseline assessment. So you do want to look at both of those and look at them independently as well as together to evaluate kind of your abdominal fat accumulation. So those are things that are important related to weight. So what are some healthy strategies that we can do if we need to adjust our weight and get closer to a normal weight? The very most important thing you could do is to adopt a healthy eating lifestyle. There has often been controversy over whether exercise was more important for weight loss or diet, but the research is in, and it's very clear that your nutritional choices have a bigger impact on your weight and your health than your exercise. We need both, and we're going to talk more about exercise on Sunday, but your number one strategy for weight loss is going to be your food choices and choices around your intake of food. So part of it is what you're eating, but there are some other things that are related to how and when you eat that can also be really big factors in weight loss. We want to encourage you to eat first-class foods. Those are the kinds of foods that Cindy and I have been talking about all week. Your first-class foods are foods the way our Creator designed them. Fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables in as natural a form as possible. Those are your first-class foods. Second-class foods are fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables that have been somewhat refined or processed. So you might find like your vegetable oils, you might find refined flours, refined grains. Those are going to be like second-class foods. all of your animal products kind of move into your third class category, because none of the animal foods are going to be as good for you and as health promoting as plant-based foods. So you want to really focus on first class foods. Sometimes very small amount of second class foods helps some people to make their first class foods a little more palatable, or they will eat more of their first class foods if they have just a little bit of, I don't know what, a little bit of oil in their salad dressing with some lemon juice and other things. And so we're not saying don't ever eat a second class food, but we want to just make sure we're focusing and that pretty much everything on our plate is a first class food for best strategies for losing weight. Meal timing. That's kind of a non-food issue, but we do find that as you take your calories earlier in the day, the same amount of calories will help you to lose weight just by moving the calories earlier, like by eating most of your calories for breakfast and lunch, and either skipping your evening meal or having a very light evening meal. Without even changing calorie intake, you can drop weight. It won't be a huge amount if you're not also adjusting your calories, but we do find that timing is important. So that is why intermittent fasting, that like Cindy was talking about, that certain kinds of intermittent fasting can be very helpful when you're trying to lose weight. And the kind I would recommend would be where you have the same routine every day. Some people do intermittent fasting where they do 5 days one way, they eat differently 2 days a week. I don't recommend that. I do recommend doing the same thing every day because your body gets used to that routine. And we want to work with our body clocks. So intermittent fasting, where you have have 2 meals within 8 hours or less of the day, that can work really well. You do want 4 to 5 hours between meals. So like 2 meals, 3 hours apart, that doesn't really work. But having 4 to 5 hours between meals and then having those meals in the first part of your day rather than the last part of your day, that kind of combines the timing with the intermittent fasting and avoiding snacks in between. Now, obviously, if you're on medication for your blood sugars and you start to have low blood sugar, you might need to snack to make sure it doesn't go too low. But what that really means is if you're adequately planning your breakfast and your lunch, you shouldn't need snacks. And if you are still needing snacks with good breakfast and lunches, it may mean that you need to drop your medication doses. So you need to talk to your health provider about adjusting for that so that you don't need snacks to maintain blood sugars based on the medicines you're taking. If you're not taking medications, that shouldn't be an issue. Exercise. We're going to talk about exercise because there are different types and different timings for exercise that can work synergistically with your food choices to help you lose weight. Water and hydration. Staying hydrated is huge for several different things. Your body can metabolize fat and get rid of excess fat easier when it's well hydrated versus when you are dehydrated. So just having enough water for your body to function well can be very important. Another aspect of water and hydration is that many times we think we're hungry when we're actually thirsty. So making sure we're hydrated kind of eliminates that craving that's actually based on needing more water versus needing more food. So that can be a very important strategy. Another one is getting sleep. We talked about sleep a little bit earlier this week, but sleep impacts our weight directly in terms of, for example, if we get to bed on time and early, we're less likely to get the late night munchies. So that can be really important. And sleep optimizes hormones that affect our hunger. And for me, that's a really important piece because they did this interesting study at Stanford University that had over 1,000 people in it. And they found that people that were getting less than 8 hours a night had lower leptin and higher ghrelin. Oh, not gherkin. That must be an autocorrect that I missed. A gherkin is a kind of cucumber, and that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about ghrelin. Ghrelin, GHRELIN. Leptins are the hormones that help you to feel full and satisfied, like I'm not hungry anymore. So you need higher levels of that. But when you were low on sleep, you get less leptin produced. If you have less than 8 hours of sleep a night, you have higher ghrelin levels. Ghrelin hormones are the ones that say, hey, you need to eat something because I feel like I'm not getting enough calories to sustain my weight, to stay healthy. And you start getting higher levels of ghrelin as you drop below 8 hours of sleep a night. They also found that those with under 8 hours of sleep a night had higher body fat percentages, and we think that's related to the fact that sleep deprivation is actually something that triggers a stress response in your body. And we talked earlier about how stress hormones put on body fat, especially around the belly. So when we deprive ourselves of sleep, that in and of itself is something that triggers our body's stress response, which then works against weight loss. So these are all things that can really be helpful in terms of losing weight. Now, a few other factors that are not nutritional. One of them is sunshine. Sunshine leads to better mood because of what it does to our dopamine levels, to our serotonin levels. And with a better mood, we often have less cravings for unhealthy food. I'm just wanting to check to make sure that Wendy hasn't tried to check in. No, because she was going to try to call in, but I guess that didn't work. Um, Sunshine has that really great effect on our home hormones that helps us with mood. And many times people eat or make bad choices in their eating when their mood is down. You're not feeling so great, starting to feel a little depressed or a little stressed. Well, sunshine helps with those feelings. Morning sunshine and midday sunshine are both really important. Morning sunshine helps to improve our quality of sleep and our production of serotonin and melatonin. Midday sunshine helps to increase our vitamin D production if we happen to live far enough south. If you're in Minnesota and Michigan this time of year, even midday sunshine is probably not going to give you much in the way of vitamin D. So it is time to kick up your vitamin D supplementation. Emotions. You know, food was designed by our creator to meet physical hunger needs. But many of us have fallen into the trap of emotional eating. And sometimes that has led to our health problems. Or sometimes our health problems have aggravated our emotional eating problems. And so these things can become a real vicious cycle. So I want to emphasize how important it is for us to stop and think about the triggers for our eating, especially when we're making unhealthy choices, eating at the wrong times, eating the wrong kinds of food, eating foods that do not help us to control our blood sugars. Sometimes our triggers are somewhat linked to our emotions. So it is important as we look at health to look at all aspects of our health, not just our physical health, not just the physiology of our disease or healing from our diseases. We need to look at what's happening in our spiritual life, what's happening in our mental health and social life. All of these are part of who we are, and they all work together to put us where we find ourselves today. So, looking at our spiritual health, what's going on there? Are we doing things that help us to grow spiritually? Are we learning more about God and his plan for our lives? As we do those things and implement the things we're learning, we will see improved growth and spiritual health. And as we do that, it will help us to deal with our emotions. Mental health issues. Sometimes we have had situations in our life that have impacted us negatively. Maybe we have PTSD. We've gone through traumatic circumstances, either chronic long term stress. Maybe as children, we did not have a healthy environment growing up, and we suffered a lot of stress as we were growing up. Maybe we've gone through a situation in our adult life that was extremely stressful. Accidents, loss of important relationships, loss of a spouse, all of those leave emotional wounds that need to be healed in order to have healthy emotions. And so if you know that these are some of the things that may have be impacting the choices you're making today, I really encourage you to get help for that. In this challenge, we can't really address all of those issues, but I want to make you aware that those are issues that can be extremely important to address. And that might mean you will need to go forward looking for more support. One second. Forgot to turn off my phone ringer. You will want to look for ways that you can get the support you need for healing. For some people, that means learning more about the wounds that they have suffered and ways to think about them, ways to deal with them in the way they allow them to be triggers or not. Maybe they need to deal with forgiveness. There's a lot of things that we can learn about through books, through other resources. Some online resources can help us with that. But sometimes we actually need to interact with a professional. And so I really encourage you to do that, to look for the resources you need to deal with anything that may be linked to emotional eating. If we deal with depression, depression is a huge one. And as we have been coming through all these months of COVID and the changes that that has impacted all of our lives, and we're seeing huge spikes in people's anxiety and depression levels because of the changes they've had to deal with over the last, 7 to 9 months. So, sometimes some of this can be really new, it can be more recent, but it's things that we need to really figure out how can we deal with these effectively. So I want to also spend a few minutes talking about meal balancing. Now, I know that there are many different ways of addressing meal balancing for pre-diabetics and diabetics. I am going to share with you meal balancing approach that is evidence-based. It's based on some of the best research we have on how food works with diabetes. It is not the only way to do it, but it is probably one that I would highly recommend. This approach or something similar to it. And you will want to work with your healthcare provider or your nutritionist if what you're actually doing now isn't the same as this and you aren't any medications. Because as you go towards more of this particular approach that I'm going to be sharing with you, it will impact your blood sugars and you will need medications adjusted, and that could be very quickly. So if you're on medications, I want to reiterate, you need to start checking your blood sugars really regularly before every meal and like 1 or 2 hours after meals, and report those numbers to your healthcare providers right away so they can help you adjust things. Considerations when we're looking at meal balancing, what we're focusing on here is getting the best quality of food in the right quantities. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be looking at. And as we go through this, I want you can make notes about this. You can come back and rewatch this after I get this up. I'll have it up for a few more days in the group. But you'll want to start thinking about what are you actually doing now and what would it take to move in this direction? Because everybody's starting in different places. But let's take a look at our macronutrients. Those are the ones that really impact our blood sugars in a big way, and we need to consider the 3 big macronutrients as we think about balancing meals. Those 3 macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So I'm going to start with carbohydrates because this is probably where the biggest differences are between different recommended approaches dietary wise for diabetics. So in this meal balancing approach, we're going to look at types of foods and then the amounts that you would want per meal or per day. So the first group of carbohydrates, because there are different groups within carbohydrates, they aren't all equal, as we talked about before. So I'm first going to look at starchy carbohydrates. We need to count those. We need to know how much we're getting when it comes to starchy carbohydrates. There are 2 main groups of starchy carbohydrates: starchy grains and starchy vegetables. So between those starchy grains and starchy vegetables, we want 15 to 45 grams per meal. And this range is going to be dependent a little bit like on how out of whack your blood sugars are. You'll want to go to the lower end of the range if you're having a lot of struggles with blood sugars, or if you're a smaller person. Okay, because like an 80-pound diabetic does not need the same number of calories from starchy grains as a 250-pound diabetic. So, there's a range here, and you will need to do some experimentation to see what really works best for you. So, I'm going to be giving you ranges for each of these. So, we're looking here at 1 to 3 servings of starchy grains, which is, for example, a third of a cup of rice, a third of a cup of most whole grains. Um, and obviously, if we're looking at quality, we're looking at only really considering whole grains here. We're not considering refined or processed grains to be something we should be eating and counting. We really don't want to have those because the quality really matters in terms of impact on your blood sugar. Now, starchy carbs also need to be counted. And the allowance is that allowance we were talking about. So it's like you can split your allowance between starchy carbs and starchy grains, but the total allowance is still 15 to 45 grams per meal. Starchy vegetables are things like corn and sweet potatoes and winter squash. Um, Another one, root vegetables. Your Irish potatoes, your carrots, and your beets all tend to be starchy root vegetables. So you need to make sure you're not getting too many of those things, which is why we count those carbohydrate grams. Now, beans and peas can also be counted as carbohydrates unless you're counting them as protein. So I would count them as protein first. And like if you finished your protein allowance and you still have some carb allowance left, you could use beans or peas for that as well. So I hope that's clear. I find personally that I do my grain starchy carbs at breakfast because that's fits with breakfast foods more, like my cereals or my bread or whatever if I'm going to do anything like that, it's going to be mostly for breakfast. And then I do more my starchy vegetables at lunch, where I might have a bit of sweet potato or some winter squash or corn or something. So we have another category of carbohydrate, which is fruit. And there are many diabetic meal plans that do not allow much in the way of fruit for diabetics. But we found that actually fruit is not the big problem for diabetics. The problem is insulin resistance. And when we're addressing that, then it allows us to use our glucose properly, whether it comes from fruit or from something else. And we need the micronutrients that are in fruit. So it's not healthy to eliminate all fruit. We simply need to look at our quantity. And the recommended quantity is 45 to 75 grams of carbohydrate a day from fruit. That's about 3 to 5 servings. Now, just for reference, these particular numbers I am pulling from recommendations from Dr. Wes Youngberg. Dr. Wes Youngberg is the one who wrote the Goodbye Diabetes book that I recommended earlier in the week. He's been working with diabetics and successfully helping them reverse their disease for many, many years. And he's also a personal acquaintance of mine. I've known him from grad school. I don't know if he remembers me, but I remember him. And so these numbers are coming from his recommendations. These are also, he's also the one that has put together the Diabetes Undone 8-week program for diabetes reversal. And I really like his materials, and I like them so much. I'm actually integrating his materials into my 3-month diabetes reversal program called Undoing Diabetes. So when people come into my diabetes reversal program, they get access to all of Wes Youngberg's program because I find that his materials are just really, really good and very effective and have been proven and have good results. And so I like to give people access to all of those resources when they go through my group coaching program. So that's where these numbers are coming from. And I also want to say we don't have to count the carbohydrates that we find in non-starchy vegetables. And so that makes a lot of things easier. For example, non-starchy vegetables are all your leafies, your stems, your flowers that Cindy was talking about yesterday. So broccoli and cauliflower and celery and all the leafies, lettuce and cabbage and kale and collards and Swiss chard, Brussels sprouts. You don't even have to count those carbohydrates. You can eat to where you're just satisfied, which is one of the reasons, we recommend starting with this category in your meal when you have a vegetable meal. If you start with this category, it helps to fill you up, and then you can kind of have just like the smaller portions of the other things you do have to count, and you're not going to feel deprived or hungry. And so we want you to get food from all of the food groups. We do not eliminate any food groups. So let's take a look at protein, because that is also extremely important for diabetics. This helps your meals to have higher satiety. It helps to stabilize your blood sugars, but it helps you so you don't get hungry between meals as well. And you want 2 to 6 servings a day of protein, with at least 2 at a meal. And I say that because if you do the 2 meal a day, you can probably have 2 to 3 servings a meal, because you can get all your protein in those 2 meals. But if you're going to spread it out over 3 meals, then we're looking at about 2 per meal. And the reason you want 2 servings per meal is so that it carries your blood sugars over. And having it especially at the breakfast helps you for the rest of the day in controlling blood sugars. 1 serving of protein is 7 grams. 7 grams is like a half a cup of cooked beans. Beans, tofu, falafel, meat analogs, all of those are sources of protein that can be used in this section. Notice that meat analogs are not whole foods, so they're really second class. So we want to emphasize our first class proteins here. Second class proteins would also include things like eggs, and 1 egg would be a serving of protein. Dairy products, we want to discourage using a lot of them because they just come with so much baggage, and it's baggage that works against best health. Meat is not included in our first and second class foods. Meat is a third class. So that just kind of helps you to think about, where am I getting my proteins? Nut butters. You want nut butters that are natural, made from the whole nut, do not contain added fats or sugars. And nut butter is a tablespoon of like almond butter or peanut butter would be a serving. So that helps you to kind of think about what you're doing there at breakfast. Now, fat. That's also important. And fat is super important for satiety. It helps you not to get hungry. But we don't need a lot of it. We do need some, and having a little bit every meal is very helpful. Not only is it helpful for satiety, but it's also important for the absorption of certain nutrients. Like fat-soluble vitamins need to come along with a meal that has some fat in it. So that helps us to absorb some micronutrients that are really important for health. 5 grams of fat is a serving. So 5 grams of fat would be like a teaspoon of oil, which is not your first class food. That is a second class food. But it would also be something like about 6 or 7 almonds, a few walnuts. You can have 2 to 4 servings per meal. So you can split that up. You can have a little bit of nuts and maybe a piece of avocado. You can have some olives in your salad and also sprinkle some nuts on it. So, you can kind of parse that around. And 2 to 4 servings per meal, I find that that's actually quite adequate. But I did find that using whole foods gives you a lot more bang for your buck. Like, you get a lot more bulk for the same number of fat grams, and it makes you just feel like you've had more food. So when it comes to fat, I really, really emphasize using whole foods. So nuts and seeds are going to be where you get a lot of that. Okay. I want to remind you that you can do it. And so if you have questions now about any of these things we've talked about, and there are a couple of things that I didn't cover under the meal balancing that maybe I'll just kind of add here. I don't have a slide for it, but I do want to just talk about a little bit. And one of them is like milk and dairy products. We already talked about trying to cut down on the amount of dairy products. Using non-dairy milks, for example, is a really great substitute. They are, I think, literally hundreds on the market these days. The ones that I would steer you towards are those that have the higher levels of protein in them, but are not sweetened. So one that a lot of people really enjoy would be things like almond milk. And if you use like unsweetened almond milk, the calories in that are actually low enough that you don't even have to count them as a carbohydrate. You don't have to count it as anything. You don't have to count it as a protein or a carbohydrate. You can just add some unsweetened almond milk to whatever you're doing for breakfast and not even worry about counting it. And so I like that too, because that gives me a little more volume with like a half a cup of milk. Sometimes I will actually, instead of a bowl of cereal, because for me, a quarter cup of granola just doesn't seem like a bowl of cereal. And it's really dense in terms of calories, even a whole food based granola for me. So I will often do something like cut up a bowl of fruit. I'll get my 2 servings of fruit into a bowl, add some nuts. I'll add a little bit of ground flaxseed, or I do like a combination of flax, chia, and sesame seed. Sprinkle that on top, and then pour some milk on it. And then the flax and the chia seed kind of thickens, and it doesn't get so gaggy for me because it's mixed with this whole bowl of like fruit and nuts, and I get some crunch with the nuts, and I love doing it with apples because they're such a high satiety fruit. But I'll find that like a bowl of that is extremely satisfying, and I don't get hungry, especially if I have like a little bit of avocado, or I have to watch my gluten intake, so I don't do a lot of wheat stuff or breads, but I will do something called Thin Crisp, which is like those little Scandinavian flatbreads. And the Thin Crisp is really thin. So it's like 3 of those are only 1 serving of starchy grain. So it's like 3 that are like this size. And so I'll take like raw garlic and rub raw garlic on it because it's very rough, and it works like a grater on the garlic. And so I'll just rub a garlic clove on it. And then I usually allow myself a quarter of an avocado at breakfast. That's my fat. And then I'll mash the avocado and put it on top of the cracker with that garlic. It's just amazing. And so that'll do my grain often for my breakfast. Um, let's see if there's anything else. I think that's kind of the main things when it comes to the meal balancing. I go into it a lot more with my coaching, where we have more time to talk about it and we can really sit down and make like menus and do meal plannings and stuff. But I think that kind of covers the main bits of the importance of meal balancing and making sure that we're not eliminating food groups, that we're having protein every meal, and that we're watching the starchy grains and vegetables. Those are kind of like really key points that can help us with the losing weight and with controlling our blood sugars. It goes together. I found when I started doing this, because I was having like higher blood sugars, I was definitely in the pre-diabetic range. I found that doing this, I was able to lose like 20 pounds over a couple of months. And it really made a difference for me. And I found that I wasn't hungry. And I have like a little method that I use that I teach people that go through my class. That made it really easy to track these servings, where I didn't have to like be using my computer and putting every single item in every meal. After I got started, after like about 1 week of tracking, I didn't need to do that anymore. So that was really helpful. As Cindy mentioned earlier, if you're wanting to like just get an idea of the number of grams you're eating of different things like fat or carbs or protein, you can use a little app like MyFitnessPal. And there are others out there that are on your phone. I like MyFitnessPal because it has a really big database of food. Like you can put stuff in there that are brand name, and they have like all these different brands for pretty much all your foods. You can even scan barcodes on anything that has a barcode, and it'll then give you the nutritional breakdown for it. So I find it's one of the ones that's most complete that I have used. Doesn't mean it's the only one out there. So that is, I think, yeah, those were kind of the main things I wanted to talk about there. So I think be thinking about your questions. There are a couple of things, just kind of housekeeping things that I want to say before I forget, to make sure you know. I know I talked to you about getting the links to your recipe books in the group. I figured out that I'm going to have to do a little updating and some things on my website to make that work. So you will get that, but not quite yet. So just hang on, and I will give you all of that for your for the cookbooks that you were asking about. Your Thanksgiving recipe packet is in the group. So I've already uploaded that. It was kind of late last night, so you might not have seen it, but it is there. And as we're going through these things, I want you to be thinking now over the weekend. This is kind of your homework. Think about what will be most helpful to you to keep the plans that you've made in place, like to follow through with the plans and the strategies and the tools that you have been thinking about this week. When you look at what your health priorities are and where you're going, I really want us to make sure we get that third step of seeking a support system. We get that in place by the end of our day on Sunday. So be thinking about what kinds of things would be most helpful to you going forward to help you stick to the things that you're wanting to do. So we're going to talk about some options for that on Sunday. We're going to talk about, for example, how can we learn more? Because the more we understand, the more informed our choices are. So the educational piece is often something that's very helpful to people. We're going to also look at what it means to have support and accountability going forward, because when we make changes, often support and accountability are pieces of that puzzle that we need to put in place if we're going to be really effective. So I have actually, I'm actually doing something special for you guys here in the challenge, which is I'm going to add to our challenge another little bonus, which is we're going to get on the phone together so that I can talk to each one of you individually and make sure that you've got a plan in place that's going to work really well for you as you go through the holidays. So be thinking about what is it that you think you're going to need? What are the obstacles that you still feel like you might be facing? And then we can talk about what are the best ways to get past that when we get on a phone call after our training on Sunday. So I just wanted to kind of give you that as homework to be thinking about what would be most helpful to me in terms of planning for success and keeping and maintaining the changes that I want to make. So I will do some research on the D3K2 question. We'll get the recipe books going for you. And I just want to wish you guys a really good weekend. So let's open it up now for questions. Anything that's come up, any comments, and it doesn't even have to be about today's training, but about anything we've talked about during the week or something that's come up in your life that you want to talk about. So let's go to that section now, questions and answers. Unmute yourself and come right on in. Looks like Denise is ready to say something.
Well, I take this vitamin D supplement here, if you can see it.
Okay, let me
It's
see it bigger.
Neurobiologics,
Okay.
and it's the vitamin D3 plus K2 cofactor complex, and it has zinc, picolinate, and boron in it also.
Oh,
And I get this from Modern Manna Ministries in California.
yes, they've got a great outfit there.
Yeah, and so I've been taking this. At one point, my vitamin D was down to 30, and after several months of taking the 10,000, and this is what this is,
Okay.
and it is up to 100.
Oh, okay.
And that's probably as high as it should go, but
Yes.
and so once I got it up there, I just took this because it only comes in the 10,000.
Well,
And so
you can.
I was just taking it a few times a week, but now in the winter, they told me I should take it every day again.
But I would, if it's at 100, I would drop back on your dose. I would go back to 2 to 5,000 international units a day.
Okay.
And you can get that as a D3. Nature's Sunshine is a brand. There's several different brands. I might put some links.
2 to 3. Okay.
Yeah, I'll share some links on a resource page. I'll give you a link too.
Because you don't want it to go too high, is that it?
Yeah, and you don't need that huge amount. It is stored in your liver, so it's not something that like disappears every few days because you didn't take some, like some other.
Okay, stored in. Okay.
Yeah, and so you probably can just save that really high-powered one for, and like I suggest that people recheck their vitamin D towards the end of the winter and so that you have both a level like at the end of the summer and a level at the end of the winter. That helps you to know kind of what
Okay.
your range is, especially for you northerners. I think that's really important. And because you've been supplementing, when was the last time you had your D checked?
Um, it's been about a year because I go for my physical later this month
Okay, then
again. So,
yes, I would get it rechecked this month.
yep, I will.
Yeah, and then kind of see where it is because now you're past the summer. This is probably as low as it will get with your supplementation levels. So if
Hmm.
it's still, well in the good range, you can probably drop back to the probably 2,000 a day would be enough to maintain. But I
Okay.
would recheck. I would recheck in the middle of winter sometime, like January, February. I would do a recheck on the D just to see if you're maintaining.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, really, that's a good
If
question.
that's if that's not capsules, if it comes as a pill, you can cut the pill in half. I don't know how that is.
No, it's a capsule.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
capsule.
A lot of the
So,
more bioavailable ones are liquid, so I'm not surprised.
okay.
Okay, but yes, that's a good quality supplement that you have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Modern Mannon's not too far from me, and
Oh, really? Cool.
yeah, I really
Mhm.
appreciate the ministry that they're doing.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Jackie, I'd love some feedback from you because I know you've been working in this area a lot. But you are muted, so I can't hear you. There we go.
Okay, you didn't say anything at all about checking your blood sugar, the glucose meter. Seems like a few days ago you recommended checking fasting blood glucose every day.
Yes, I did. And I mentioned that again at the beginning of the food section today, but it's okay. You might have just missed it. Um, Checking your blood sugars when you make any adjustments in your diet, or if your blood sugars aren't well controlled and you're working to control them. And either one of those two situations, checking every day is really important. And I totally agree with that, Jackie. You need to know what it is when you get up in the morning. And then if you're making changes or adjustments, you also need to know what's happening after your meals. And so I do recommend tracking what you eat, your quantities, what your foods were, and then tracking what your blood sugars are. Like I would recommend 2 hours after, unless you're really brittle and really uncontrolled. I think 2 hours after will probably give you a good number. Now, Jackie, with the people that you've been working with, do you usually tell them it should be back to fasting in 2 hours or just down? What do you usually
Sources I've consulted say that your blood sugar typically peaks at 60 to 90 minutes. And so if you wait until 2 hours or 3 hours, you're going to miss a blood sugar spike.
Yes.
So that's why we recommend that. By 2 hours, or at least by 3 hours, it should be back to your pre-meal number.
Okay. Yeah, that's basically the same kind of criteria that I use. And she's correct. If you want to catch the spike, like see what's the highest my blood sugar is going, you want to do that an hour after. And that's an hour after you begin to eat. That's where you count the hour from.
Right, an hour from the first bite.
Yeah.
Not
So,
not an hour from when you're finished.
right. So I just want to clarify that. And yes, monitoring blood sugars is such an important practice. Whenever you know that you're having issues with your metabolism and that your metabolism is not normal, even if you're just pre-diabetic, even if you have metabolic syndrome, I think you should be checking your own fasting blood sugars on a regular basis. Maybe not every day if you're in metabolic syndrome, but maybe once a week, because that can change. And so you want to catch it before anything is getting worse, and you want to know if there's a trend. So yeah, tracking those is really, and there's a lot of apps that you can get now to put on your phone that allow you to track it really easily. Like when you check your blood sugar, that you can just put it in there and then you can compare and you can see how things are going over time. You can make notations that tell you if this blood sugar was fasting, was it an hour after your meal, was it 2 hours after a meal, or 3 hours. You can put your notes in that tell whatever it is. So that's really important information for your healthcare provider as well. So I really do recommend tracking that.
Yeah, actually,
Yep.
the meter that I have is a one touch, just
Mhm.
because that's what my insurance covers. And they now have an app. You can
Yes.
plug your meter into your computer, and you can download all that information. So that makes it really handy.
Yes, that is another way to do it. And that's a good one too. So I
Now,
don't,
I
I don't
wonder,
think you can do that with the cheapest of the glucometers, but yes, if you just go up a little bit, you can. And sometimes they Bluetooth connect. Do you plug yours in or do you just Bluetooth connect it?
um, I've got a cable.
Okay.
I trust the cable more than the Bluetooth.
Okay. All right.
And my fitness tracker, I've got a Garmin.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you can see it here. It's like a watch, like an Apple Watch, but it's a Garmin. Um, and it definitely has to communicate with my phone
Bluetooth.
to get
Yeah.
all the information. And
Yeah.
also, I want to say about fitness, my Fitness Pal. You're one of the
Okay.
few people I know that recommend that. The one thing that I love about my Fitness Pal is that it has a recipe analyzer.
Yes. I forgot to mention that because I use that all the time.
Yeah, so do I. You can just put in a recipe that's on the internet. You can just put the URL of your recipe page, and it'll pick it up, and it'll go through all the ingredients. And if it doesn't get one quite right,
You can adjust it.
you can
edit
change it.
Mhm.
Like sometimes, well, I put in salt, not that I count salt, but if I'm putting in a recipe, and it might pick up salted potato chips or something
Yeah.
instead of but you can adjust the kind, you can adjust the brand,
Mhm.
or you can adjust a lot of things on it. So anyway, I love my Fitness Pal. I've used it for years.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that somebody else likes it too. But I use it for the recipe function too, but I use it the other way. Like she said, you can plug in internet recipes and get your analysis, but I make a lot of my own recipes. So I can
Yeah,
plug in my
you can
recipes and then get the analysis. So I
you,
love that.
you can put in your own recipes. You can put it in manually, and yeah, I do that a lot too.
Yeah. So yeah, I find that just works so well. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. Anybody have any other questions? Well, I'm just going to give you a day tomorrow to rest and relax and recuperate. And then we will be
Yes.
back on Sunday. Sunday, remember, we're changing the time. It's going to be 4 o'clock Pacific time, 7 o'clock Eastern. So don't let that mess you up.
Central.
Yes, 6 o'clock Central. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. We covered all of our time zones? I think so. So I hope you have a great Sabbath. Have a good rest. We will
Thank you.
see you back on Sunday. Thank you so much.